Whenever they ask about me, I never feel like telling the story of the day I was born. I'd rather speak of the first time I asked, why? But if one must begin with birth, then so be it. Let me begin. It was the year 980. I opened my eyes to the world in Afshana, a small village with a big heart near Bukhara, where the winds carried whispers of wisdom. My father, Abdullah, was a government official who had migrated from Balkh. My mother, a quiet woman, yet one who spoke deeply through her intuition. They say I was born a child, like any other, but deep inside, I've always believed I came from somewhere else, as if I was whispered into time, as a question from the universe itself. Who placed me beneath this sky? Why does the night weep, and the stone remain silent? Even in my cradle, I curled around thought, and silence itself began asking me questions. Before I learned to walk, I was already dancing with words. Even my earliest sounds resembled curiosity. My mother used to say, "This child speaks with his eyes." But in truth, I was trying to hear the answers trapped within silence. One day, I looked up at the sky and tried to count the stars. I failed, and I cried. My father lifted me in his arms and said, "They are infinite, my son. Infinite." What did that mean? Where did it begin, and where did it end? Even then, the weight of such a concept intoxicated my mind. Though our village was small, it lay along the trade routes. I grew up listening to the tales brought by merchants from distant lands. Each story whispered a new why into my ears. Gods, spirits, shadows, light, all of them, riddles turning endlessly in my mind. At the age of 5, I met the Quran. The letters spoke to me as if they carried secrets. I memorized it quickly, became a Hafiz, but that wasn't enough. To recite without understanding, it sat heavy in my stomach, like a stone. Every letter is a doorway, every verse a breath, and if there is an echo behind the silence, I will chase that echo. On warm summer days, my father would test me with math problems, but I was more interested in the nature of the questions than the answers. Why were they asked this way? Who built these systems? Why were numbers so silent, yet so powerful? When I was 6, I met an old sage who lived near our home. I don't recall his name, but his eyes read time like a book. I asked him, "Does everything have an answer?" He stayed silent for a long time, then said only this, "Only as much as the power of your mind." And from that moment, I understood. The goal is not to find the answer, but to ask the right question. Some children cling to toys, others to fairy tales. I held on to thought. Every morning, I woke with a new question in my soul, and every night, I made peace with the answers I had not yet found. I am Ibn Sina. My name grew with knowledge. My birth was not merely the emergence of my body, it was the birth of my first thought. And even now, I still ask, what am I? Where did I come from? Do my eyes see what my heart believes? If my mind is paper, is the universe the pen? My father was a man who followed the path of reason. On his journey from Balkh to Bukhara, he carried not only a position, but also an idea. He was someone who respected words. Every sentence of his felt like a call. Understand, then believe. There was never a shortage of debates in our home. Our guests were not only people, but ideas. Fragments of thought echoed through the corners of our room, from Zoroastrianism to Islam, from Pythagoras to Aristotle. Some nights, my father would take my hand and point to the sky. "Learn the stars, my son. They are silent, but they teach." It was through my father's voice that I learned my first truths, as ancient as books, as simple as the stars. Our house never slept at night. The mind was awake. The tongue may rest, but the intellect would ask. My father introduced me early on to the texts of the Iranian philosophers. By the age of 10, I had encountered logic. My mother, on the other hand, possessed a deeper kind of wisdom, a wisdom that guided through intuition. Sometimes she would say nothing at all, just look into my eyes and whisper, "Read with your heart." Even her silence felt like a lesson. I memorized the Quran before I turned 5, but memorization alone didn't satisfy me. I kept wondering, why were the verses arranged this way? Why were certain words repeated? It wasn't a void inside me. It was a fire that whispered, "To believe without understanding is incomplete." I had teachers. Each of them opened a door for me, but it was up to me to walk through. When I learned geometry, I lost myself in the world of shapes. The circle, the triangle, the line. They were not just drawings to me. They were the language of existence. To me, numbers weren't just quantities. They were the silent letters of being. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say I taught myself medicine. My father brought me books, and I would read them through the night, then test what I learned on myself. Even the scent of herbs caught my attention. I searched for secrets in the veins of every leaf. Knowledge was a lake. I threw stones into it. Every echo was a question. Every echo, an answer. And I built my mind out of those echoes. Some called me a child prodigy, but I was merely a soul that was deeply thirsty. To question felt as natural as breathing. And when I asked, "What is this?" what I truly meant was, "What am I?" My father used to say, "Knowledge stands on 3 legs: reason, patience, and doubt." I already loved reason. I was learning patience. And doubt was my most faithful companion, because whenever I doubted, a new door to knowledge opened. Ibn Sina. I did not carry knowledge like a stone on my back. I drank it like water. And now, when I look back, I understand it was not just books or lessons that shaped me. It was the endless curiosity behind everything. A child stood at the door of the mind. No lock, no key in his hand. Only one question in his heart: is knowledge freedom? And I stepped through that door. There was no going back. The mind begins to sprout in childhood, but its roots sink deep into time with silent persistence. I grew up, and so did my questions. I no longer asked just why. I began to ask, how do we heal? Because it is not only through thought, but through pain, that one truly begins to question existence. We didn't have a library as vast as a palace, but my father was a master traveler when it came to carrying ideas. Wherever there was a wise man, he listened. Wherever there was a book, he brought it to me. My mother still didn't speak much, but one day, as she stroked the head of a sick bird, she whispered, "Wounds are healed, not by the one who sees them, but by the one who feels them." In that moment, I understood. Medicine was not only knowledge, but intuition, not only science, but compassion. I would no longer be content with being just a scholar. I would become a healer, and perhaps the soul could be treated just like the body. I turned inward, found pain stored deep in the heart. Tears were more than salt. Illness could sometimes be cured with words. By the time I was 16, I had read most of the medical texts I could find, but I learned not from the language of books, but from the gaze of the sick, touching the fevered forehead of a child, listening to the breath of an old man. They were my true teachers. Then came a moment. The physicians in Bukhara began to seek my advice. I was only 17 when I heard that the ruler of Bukhara had fallen gravely ill. The doctors were helpless. Thanks to my father, I was brought before him. I listened to his pulse, looked into his eyes, and heard his silence. I thought for nights. Then I proposed a treatment. He recovered. That treatment opened the palace gates for me. But more importantly, the unparalleled library of the Samanid court. It was a treasure. The scent of knowledge seemed to cling to the stones. There I met Aristotle. I debated Galen. I wandered through the dreams of Plato, but I didn't settle for understanding a text. After each line, I asked myself, are these only their words? Or could they also have come from my own mind? Thus began my deepening journey into philosophy. The first time I read Aristotle's Metaphysics, I understood nothing. I returned to it again and again, until I found the commentaries of Al-Farabi. Then a light sparked in my mind. Philosophy felt like a dream at first, walking through fog. Farabi handed me a lantern, and existence began to speak within me. I divided my nights in two, the first half for reading, the second for reflection. When my eyes tired, I would walk beneath the stars and ask, what order do you reflect? And even in silence, the stars nourished me. Medicine taught me the body. Philosophy taught me the universe. One revealed the limits of man, the other, the infinity of being. Sometimes I wondered, which heals more, medicine or thought? I'm still searching for that answer. One day, they brought me a man. He had no physical illness, no visible wound, but he neither walked nor spoke. The physicians had given up. I observed him. There was a lock in his thoughts. I approached him, first with music, then with words. Suddenly, his eyes filled with tears. He spoke. That day I realized, philosophy, too, could heal. The soul, too, can be wounded. The soul, too, must be wrapped in care. Medicine does not heal only the body. Wisdom brings healing to the heart. And so, I became skilled. Perhaps master is too bold a word. But I can say this. I took one more step forward, digesting every bit of knowledge, questioning every concept. To me, knowledge was not a height, but a depth. I am Ibn Sina. I did not simply learn knowledge, I lived with it. Medicine taught me the language of the body. Philosophy revealed the silence of existence. And when I united them, I could walk more steadily through the great riddle we call life. Now, looking back, I ask myself, when we seek knowledge, what is it we're truly seeking? Truth or meaning? And perhaps the answer is this: they are one and the same, for truth only echoes in a heart that understands. The long nights I spent within the library walls were filled not just with knowledge, but with a calling. Every line I read became another verse inside me. I didn't read to memorize texts. I read to speak with them. But soon I realized reading alone was not enough. What I understood piled up within, and when left unspoken, it turned to weight. That was the day I picked up the pen for the first time, not to echo the thoughts of others, but to give form to the sparks of my own mind. Every sentence carried the pain of birth, for writing is thought clothed in flesh. My first work was in medicine, for to write of the body's secrets was to me a hymn to the Creator. The first chapters of the canon of medicine, Al-Qanun fi al-Tib, began to take shape in my mind during those years. It was perhaps too early to call it a book, but as the pages filled, I understood knowledge, when not shared, remains incomplete. The pen in my hand, like a reed flute, I blew breath into thought, each word a note, each paragraph a melody. Knowledge must not only be understood, it must be felt. With each sentence I wrote, I asked myself, why are you saying this? And then, to an imaginary reader, will they thirst the way you do? As I organized my medical notes, I listened not only to the body's voice, but to the silence of the soul. Thus began the foundations of Al-Najat, the Book of Salvation. In it, I sought not only the healing of the body, but the liberation of the mind and soul. For to me, truth must resonate through every layer of the human being. Sometimes I wrote until the call to prayer at dawn. I would awaken with the pen in hand and sleep the same way. Behind me, the shadows of philosophers walked, Aristotle, Plotinus, Farabi, but I did not wish to be their shadow. I longed to be their echo. Not only medical facts, but metaphysical questions poured onto my page. What is man? Why does existence exist? Does the soul carry the body, or does the body carry the soul? As I searched for these answers, the opening lines of Kitab al-Shifa, the Book of Healing, were born. Existence asks me, where do you seek me? In my heart? In my mind? In the heavens? And I reply, everywhere and nowhere. The more I wrote, the deeper I became. And the deeper I became, the more alone I felt. Each word pulled me away from the ordinary and closer to my own inner voice. Sometimes I wondered, will these words ever be understood? Or are they whispered only to me? But still, I wrote, because to understand is sacred, but so is to express. Writing became a kind of prayer, silent, inward, and without demand. Some nights, I wept at a single word. Some mornings, I was reborn with a single paragraph. With every line, I became more of Ibn Sina, not only one who thinks, but one who makes others think. I prayed with my pen, spoke with my books, wished every sentence would leave a mark, even if time erased them. May the thought remain. As my first works took shape, I realized, when shaped by knowledge, the pen does not merely write. Sometimes it heals a person, a people, even an era. And so, with every line, I tried to heal both myself and my time. I am Ibn Sina. When I wrote my first works, I poured not only my knowledge, but myself onto the page. And now, when I look back upon those pages, I ask, were my words an ending or the beginning of something else? In another mind, Ibn Sina, the silent collapse of an empire. Every sentence I wrote rose like a voice, but the world outside grew quieter with each passing day. In the streets of Bukhara, where once knowledge reigned, now only the shadows of swords wandered. The splendor of the Samanid palace faded with the dust that settled on forgotten books. There was a strange heaviness in me. In the brightest moment of my learning, I was witnessing the darkest collapse of power, and I asked myself, can a mind armed with knowledge prevent the fall of a kingdom? Alas, the answer was silence. As the palace walls began to crack, I remained in the libraries. Every scream from the outside closed another book. Every report of defeat left another sentence unfinished. Can books fall silent? Yet noise silenced them. Knowledge had a tongue, but war had no ears. Bukhara was no longer a center of civilization. It was now a route of escape. The fall of the Samanids was not just the end of a dynasty, but of an era. As the walls of my youth fell one by one, I searched for the future beneath the stones of the past. And again, the burning question returned. If the homeland of a scholar collapses, where does his knowledge go? One by one, the palace men were either captured or fled. I carried my pen on my back. The libraries were gone, but a universe had grown inside me. I had to protect it, for this knowledge was not mine alone. It was a treasure entrusted to time. It wasn't the falling stones that shattered me, not the collapse of the palace, but the scream of silence. I had written so much. Now, I could say nothing. An empire fell. Letters grew quiet. But in my heart, a spark remained. Knowledge migrates, but it does not perish. As the last Samanid ruler was sent to his death, I had to begin anew. There was no palace behind me, no path to any throne, but ahead of me lay a desert full of unwritten thoughts, and I kept walking past the ruins, for I had understood a scholar's country is not found on maps. It lives within his mind. I am Ibn Sina. The palaces crumbled, the dynasties fell, but I lost only one thing, certainty, and my questions still whisper to me, to build a new world, you must walk first through the ashes of the old. The Samanid Empire had fallen. The palace was silent. Cities turned to ruins. But in my mind, a single echo remained. You must write. For I had not lost a throne. I had found a language, the language of the pen. As I set out on the road to exile, I carried no maps, only a compass of ideas. And now, every stop became the threshold of a new work. This was no escape. It was a search. My nights were filled not with sleep, but with thought. And the mornings began not with routine, but with pages. Every day I awoke. A new work began to form in my mind. With pen in hand, I wrote as if walking against the wind, because I no longer sought shelter in walls, but in words. The first great wave came in Gorgon. There, in the quiet, the ruler offered me. The book of healing began to grow. page by page, logic, physics, metaphysics, mathematics, questions poured into my mind from every direction. And in that book, they began to find answers. Yet behind every answer, another question waited. What is the purpose of true knowledge? To serve rulers, or to awaken individuals? To illuminate this world, or the world beyond? As the pages filled, the night grew still. Every letter that fell from my pen touched the earth like a star, and I wrote as if bringing the sky down to the ground. That storm of writing, which began in Gorgon, continued through Ray, Qazvin, and finally Hamadan. Each city, another work. Each moment, another mystery. There were days I wrote an entire book in a week. I may not remember their titles, but I will never forget the tremor in my soul as I wrote them. They called me the philosopher-physician, but I was merely a pen that questioned. My writings were reflections of my soul. When I wrote of love, it was the hand of a child in awe of life that held my pen. My work was not only scientific. I wrote about love, morality, happiness, and death, because true knowledge must not only understand blood, it must understand the heart, one hand on the pulse, the other holding a poem. As I measured the rhythm of the body, I listened for the melody of the soul. Each sentence taught me this. Knowledge is not a stone that sits still. It is a river, and that river only gives life where it flows. So I never stopped. The more I wrote, the farther I traveled. Sultans rose and fell. Palaces were built and ruined. But what I wrote was more enduring than palaces, more powerful than kings. Because an idea is not gold. It is not meant to be hidden. It is meant to be shared. And in sharing, it multiplies. One day I asked myself, you've written hundreds of books, but why? For power? For fame? No, because there was something inside me that refused to be silent, and the only way to quiet it was to write. I am Ibn Sina. I was never a king. I built no armies. I ruled no land. But with words, I built a civilization. My papers were my soil, my pen, my sword, and each book was a monument I raised in the center of time. Now, as I look back, I see my greatest journey took place between the pages. The roads have changed, the cities have faded, but what I wrote still lives, because the true home of a scholar is not where he sleeps, but where his books are read. Mine was a life shaped by writing. As I poured my thoughts onto pages, I believed I was changing the world. But fate had a different intention. One morning, as I walked through the weary stone streets of Hamadan, what stood before me wasn't just a city. It was a call to power. The command came, let Ibn Sina be vizier, a thinker, a physician, now summoned to one of the highest offices of the state. And I asked myself, what happens when one who seeks truth with a pen enters a world ruled by the sword? I set aside the works still forming in my mind and stepped into the stone corridors of the palace. My words were no longer addressed to wounded bodies, but to broken systems. On the first day, I sealed a decree. On the second, I made a decision. By the third, I understood. To rule is not the same as to write. A vizier's pen no longer writes poetry, not hope between the lines, but orders, and each signature shapes a destiny. When Shams al-Dawla fell ill, it was my healing that earned his favor. But now, I stood in his shadow, governing in his name. At night, wandering the palace courtyard, I'd debate with my own soul, O Ibn Sina, when did you turn from the heart to the state? Every command became a philosophical question. What is right for a people? What is justice? Is knowledge truly power, or merely light? The Vizierate left little time for contemplation, but even then, I never stopped writing. The works I penned within the palace walls reflected an inner conflict. The thinker and the ruler, locked in silent battle, among stone and silence, a pen resists time. Between decrees, a verse hides, seeking its voice within the palace. This duty revealed to me the dual nature of man. To think in solitude is one thing, but to turn thought into service for the people, that is the true trial. And I came to see, being vizier is not a crown, it is a burden. As I carried it, friends drifted away. Some scholars saw me no longer as one of them, but a man of the court. Yet in every decision, I still consulted my heart. The loneliness within a palace is deeper than the solitude of a madrasa. There, you are alone because no one is with you. Here, everyone is around you, but no one hears you. The vizier is surrounded by noise, but truth comes only in whispers. And to hear it, I withdrew within myself amidst the palace crowd. I am Ibn Sina, a scholar, a physician, and now a vizier. But which of these is truly me? Before me, scrolls. Beside me, maps. In my hand, a royal decree. But within me, still a child who once touched a book for the first time and felt something unexplainable. I missed that feeling. Writing was, above all else, a way of being. But to the Vizierate, it was being trapped between existence and appearance. So I made a decision. I could not remain a vizier forever. But what I wrote, that must echo beyond time. The days spent behind stone walls in Hamadan. The loneliness within the palace was heavier than the crowds outside. The true weight of the Vizierate was in my heart. For with every decision, I lost a piece of myself. And at last, I made my choice. I had to leave. The name, Isfahan. It sounded like a melody the first time it reached my ears. A place where wisdom bloomed once more. A sanctuary where words could finally breathe free. Arriving there wasn't just a journey. It was a rebirth. I set out on the road. Behind me, the palace I once sought refuge in. Ahead, uncertainty. But within me, that familiar whisper, you must write. Writing had become my refuge. Cities changed. Rulers rose and fell. But what I wrote remained. And I chose to trust the permanence of words. When I arrived in Isfahan, it wasn't palaces that opened to me. It was libraries. Allah al-Dawla offered more than friendship. He offered a home for thought. Here, no one saw me as a vizier. Here, I was once again made whole by my pen. I fell from thrones, but rose through pages. Palaces faded, ideas flourished. On my first day in Isfahan, I lifted my eyes to the sky and took a deep breath. Here, I can think, I whispered. My mind, once burdened, was now free again. The ideas I had carried in silence for years were finally ready to be born. This city gave me back the color of my ink. I greeted every morning with a book. I left every night with a paragraph. Once more, I began to descend into the deepest wells of science, philosophy, and medicine. But even as I wrote, a fracture remained within me. Can a man truly return to himself after serving the state? Part of me still lingered in Hamadan, but word by word, writing brought my soul back together. Isfahan offered me not just physical peace, but spiritual clarity. Each line I wrote was not only knowledge, it was a letter to myself. I walked through the desert with broken thoughts and arrived at a spring with books blooming in my hands. I am Ibn Sina. I was cast out from one city and found new life in another. And now, in Isfahan, with every word I write, I am reborn. Isfahan, not merely a city of sturdy stone, but a garden where thought could take root. When I arrived, I still carried the weariness of Hamadan within me. But in time, this city awakened my pen once more. It was as if my thoughts were seeds fallen to the earth, and Isfahan had been made to let them bloom. Each morning, as sunlight struck the stones of the courtyard, I would take up my pen. No more governance, only reflection and writing. It was in those days that I began to complete the two great works that had echoed within me for years: the Canon of Medicine and the Book of Healing. The Canon was never just a medical text to me. It was a mirror, an attempt to understand everything about the human being. To understand the body was to begin unlocking the doors of the soul. Every organ's function, every remedy's secret, and every diagnosis carried the story of a human life. A heartbeat sometimes becomes a sentence. Shortness of breath seeps quietly onto the page. Medicine is not just science. It is the art of speaking with the human being. As I filled the pages, one question echoed within me. What is knowledge for? Is it simply to learn, to heal, or to better understand ourselves? The Book of Healing went deeper still. Its name promised a cure, but not for illness, for ignorance. It began with logic and traveled through physics, metaphysics, astronomy, and mathematics. A structure designed to explore every corner of the mind, to reach the furthest limits of reason. In its pages, I sought answers to the questions that had long gathered in my mind. And often, finding one answer gave birth to yet another question. One question unlocks another. As answers fall silent, truth begins to speak, and in every silence, the breath of knowledge can be heard. The more I wrote, the closer I felt to myself. Sometimes, in the middle of a chapter, I would write a single line and stop, put the pen down, close my eyes. My days in Isfahan felt like the distillation of a life devoted to the page. Days filled with science, nights filled with thought, sometimes with students, sometimes with solitude, but never with emptiness, because each line I wrote took a piece of me and offered it to time. The nights sought refuge in me, and I in paper. By the flicker of a single candle, I wrote eternity in silence, and now I know these works will live longer than I ever could. I am mortal, but my words are not I am Ibn Sina. Once, I was just a curious child, then a healer, then a vizier, and now a trace behind the words. The works I wrote in Isfahan became my deepest breath left to the world. Because a person is not defined by what they live through, but by what they are remembered. For, as all things have a beginning, so too must they have an end. And I know neither stars nor men escape this truth. I was a traveler in this world, sometimes chasing the mind, other times following the whispers of the heart. But now my steps grow heavy. My feet are no longer as swift as my thoughts. The first pain came one night in Isfahan. It was as if my body could no longer bear the weight of the knowledge it had carried for years. First came the fever, then my stomach learned to stay silent, then sleep, once a loyal companion, turned its back on me. But I was a physician. I recognized my illness. I named it. And as I wrote a prescription for myself, I asked my heart, O Ibn Sina, healer of others, what will you do for your own wound? I had a body, shaped by knowledge. Now that body turns to earth. But within me, a spark still speaks, not with death, but with meaning. My friends were anxious. My students searched through my pages, hoping to find a cure, but I had fallen silent because I had understood. Truth speaks most clearly through silence. I began to think more at night. My life did not flash before my eyes. It drifted between my lines. Each book I had written turned back to look at me and asked, what happens when you leave us? I answered, I will go, but you will remain. My name may fade, but the truths I carried, they were built to endure time. One morning, I sat up in bed and looked out the window. The sun was rising, but this time, its rise felt like a farewell. Inside me, a peace, perhaps the clearest silence I had ever known. This is not an end, only a return. I go to the earth, but my words rise to the sky. Death. I did not fear it, for I had always seen death as a passage. This world, just a small stage for ideas, and I had played my part. Now the curtain falls. On my final day, I still held a pen. I could no longer write, but that pen between my fingers, it was the last witness to my life. To my students, I gave my final counsel. Do not cease seeking knowledge, but above all, strive to understand yourselves. For truth is not found outside, it is hidden within. Eternity lies in an idea, in a verse, in a formula, and when a person turns inward, they meet the universe there. I am Ibn Sina. Born in a village, I walked through palaces, endured dungeons, and searched for eternity in the pages I wrote. Now, I will continue to live in those pages. When I closed my eyes, my heart held only one feeling, gratitude, because I lived, I understood, and I told. Death was just a door. I walked through that door, but behind me, what remained open were the pages. I no longer have a body, but my name still lives on tongues. I may no longer breathe, but my words still wander through books, and every question calls me back again. Sometimes I wonder, did I really die, or did I just become invisible? The first thing I heard was the rustle of a page from the earth. It was the sound of my book opening in the hands of a student, centuries later. Al-Qanun fi al-Tib. One of my lines touched the heart of a young healer. In that moment, I understood. As a doctor, those I healed were mortal. But as a writer, what I wrote was close to immortality. Sometimes, in Baghdad, Cairo, or a madrasa in Andalusia, I heard my name echo. Though they were not my students, I found myself in conversations of young minds who spoke of me as their master. When my ideas traveled from Arabic to Latin, thinkers who never met me called me Avicenna. One letter changed, but the meaning remained the same. To say Ibn Sina was sometimes more than a name. It was the persistence of reason, the patience of the pen, the curiosity of the soul. I can see it. A monk bent over my books in a European library, in a dark age, with eyes seeking knowledge by candlelight, trying to decipher the cure. What I wrote as metaphysics, they read as tracing the footsteps of God, and deep inside, I feel that building this bridge was part of my destiny. Sometimes I wondered, which world do I belong to? East or West? The answer didn't take long. I belong wherever the mind belongs, because ideas know no geography. Later, they called me the Prince of Physicians. I was proud, of course, but there was a title I loved more, Physician-Philosopher, because I did not only study disease, I sought to understand the human being, not just their pain, but why they suffered. I searched for cures for heartache and for doubts of faith. Humanity is a wound, self-inflicted, and every thought is a balm laid gently upon that wound. Looking back now, I see more clearly what I chased all my life. Not a science, but truth. Medicine was only the doorway. Philosophy, the halls of the building, and metaphysics, perhaps the attic, the place where I was most alone, yet closest to the sky. Asking questions, I always thought, can a person truly know themselves? Or God? The universe? No answer was absolute, but my questions were precious because it was they who brought me closest to truth. Time passed. I returned to the earth, but my seeds remained, and in every age, someone came to water them. Ibn Rushd, Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, Thomas Aquinas. They interpreted me, opposed me, defended me, but all did one thing. They made me speak. Perhaps that is true immortality, not the survival of existence, but the echo of influence, not the body, but the resonance of thought. And once again, I ask myself, after all I wrote, all I thought, was it worth it? The answer is not clear. But this I feel, the strongest trace a person leaves behind is the ability to spark questions. In others, I did not leave answers, but bigger questions. And for that, I am at peace. Words fall to the earth, but ideas rise to the sky. A man dies, but thought marches on. At the edge of time, I am Ibn Sina. My ashes may have scattered in the wind, but my lines still live in human hands. Maybe in a doctor's bag, maybe in a philosopher's heart, maybe in a child's curiosity. And if one day a young soul looks up to the sky and questions their own existence, perhaps there, in the shadow of that question, my trace remains. Because all my life I searched for meaning, and now I know. People are forgotten, but meaning endures.